Hey guys, it's Miss Thompson. So we're going to try something a little bit different because I'm not here to do the notes for you and I don't want us to get too far behind. So we're going to try listening to me read through the notes while you guys take notes. It's going to be exactly the same as if I was here, except we might not have as much discussion paused. But other than that, you guys are going to do the exact same thing. We're going to be filling in the blank while I read through the PowerPoint slides, and I'll make sure to give you enough time to write down the notes and answer any questions that we have. So go ahead and follow along just like we normally would be. All right, so we're starting our new unit today about the Industrial Revolution. And an industrial revolution is a way of manufacturing goods and products with the use of machines rather than manpower. We see an increase in manufactured goods. We see a lot of inventions during this time period. So it's a really interesting and exciting time in American history. A lot of the technology that we have today started during the Industrial Revolution, or we see it grown to where it is today. So during the Industrial Revolution, factory machines are replacing hand tools. And so that means that large-scale manufacturing is replacing farming as the main form of work in the United States. All right, so why did we have an industrial revolution? After the War of 1812, which we know was fought between the United States and Great Britain, the United States is forced to manufacture its own goods. Before the War of 1812, most manufactured goods were made in Great Britain, and they were selling them to people in the United States. And so most manufactured goods before the War of 1812 were actually imported. And after and during the War of 1812, the United States and Great Britain are not on great terms. And so after the war, the United States has to figure out a way to manufacture goods on its own instead of relying on Great Britain for those goods. So it actually, during this time, was illegal to bring blueprints and the ideas for factories to the United States from Great Britain. And so we see people bringing these ideas in secret to the United States. And one of those men was named Samuel Slater. And he brought the technology of water-powered textile mills to America. And that's this picture that you're seeing right here. The wheel that is on the outside of a factory would be pushed with the current of the river, and as the wheel turns with that water power, machines on the inside of the building are moving and working to make those manufactured goods. So this is the first instance that we see of machinery taking over hand tools and things that are made by hand. Things that were made by hand were made in what we call a cottage industry. Usually people are making things in their home, things that are sold to local communities. Usually goods that are made by hand are not being exported around the country or to other countries. They might just be sold in their community. It can take a very, very long time to make one item when you're working in a cottage industry. And so that usually means that prices are higher because you're not able to produce as many goods in a short amount of time. So with the cottage industry, we've got high prices for goods, but they are unique items. These are handmade items. These aren't factory produced, so no item is exactly the same. That also contributes to the high prices. When you work in a cottage industry, workers can live anywhere. They were their own bosses because they are making things either from inside their own homes or a shop that they own. So this enables the workers to live anywhere and control their own industry. Now I want you to kind of pause for a second and think of something that you would consider a cottage industry. Go ahead and just think to yourself for a minute. So some examples of a cottage industry could be a carpenter. Carpenter makes things with wood. A blacksmith, someone who's working with metals. A cobbler. A cobbler makes shoes. So these would be examples of cottage industry goods, things that are made by hand, that are unique items, only made one at a time. And before the Industrial Revolution, this is how all things were produced. All right, so during the Industrial Revolution, we see the introduction of the factory system, and this is where items are made by machines instead of by hand. So this means that goods are produced faster than cottage industries, and because you're making more goods in a shorter amount of time, that means that they are charging people less for these goods. So they are lower priced goods because they are mass produced. So the factory system is bringing workers and machines together. The machines are not completely self-operated. It still does take workers to handle the machines, but they are powered by water and eventually steam, and then farther down into the future, electricity. Most of the factories that are being built were in New England, and if you remember from our map in the 13 colonies, that's going to be states like Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania. This is really where you see a separation between New England, that has an introduction of the factory system, and the South, which maintains its farming and agricultural society. So New England is a great place to set up factories because of a couple different things. Factories need water power, and New England has a lot of fast-moving rivers. These machines are not being operated by electricity. Electricity hasn't been invented yet. And so in order for these factories to operate, they need water power. And you get water power by fast-moving rivers. In addition to the rivers, New England also has access to the ocean and a lot of port cities where ships are docking for transportation. So when goods are leaving New England, they can either be shipped across the Atlantic Ocean to Europe, or they can go down the United States coast and they can be transporting goods to the south, to South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and then they can even go into the Gulf of Mexico and go to New Orleans, and goods can be shipped up the Mississippi River into the Midwest. So the fact that they have access to oceans and port cities was really important in spreading all of their products throughout the United States. New England also had a willing workforce. Most people living in the South had jobs farming, or they owned plantations, but farming was not a great career choice in New England during this time. And so you had a lot of people struggling to survive. And so when factory systems were first introduced in New England, there are a large portion of people looking for work and who were willing to work even for low wages. So we're going to stop here and answer one of our reflection questions. So the question that I want you to answer is, which system, the cottage industry or the factory system, do you think is better for consumers? And consumers is a person who's buying a good. And I want you to go ahead and explain your answer. We're going to pause here, and I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to answer your question. So please make sure that you're doing that. Just a reminder that this is one of those ways that you're getting points on your notes when you turn them in. So go ahead and get started on that stop and think question. Which system, the cottage or factory, do you think is better for consumers, who are the people buying goods? And you should be explaining your answer. All right, so there's a couple different ways that you could have answered that question. The cottage industry was great because goods are made by hand, so they're quality. They are unique items that are being made, but the downside to that is they are more expensive, and they're not producing them as fast. So whereas if a consumer wants a really good quality piece, maybe willing to spend more money, the cottage system is good for them. The factory system is beneficial because goods don't cost as much and they are made more quickly because they're mass producing these goods with machines. The downside for consumers is they might not be made with as much quality as the cottage industry, but you are able to get more goods at a lower price. So it kind of depends on what you're looking for as a consumer. All right, there's a couple specific different types of mills that start to develop in New England. One of those was called the Slater Mills. This was a mill system that was built by Samuel Slater in Rhode Island, first founded in 1790. His mill was a spinning mill, which means that they are spinning raw cotton into thread. And the way that they do that, if you remember, if you've ever seen this movie Sleeping Beauty, what she pricks her finger on is a spinning wheel. And that is a spinning wheel that would have been operated by hand, but then with the introduction of the factory system, we see spinning mills being operated by water-powered factory systems. But the Slater mills are spinning that raw cotton into thread. The Slater mills were known for employing families and young children. Children as young as ages 7 to 12 could be working in these mills. And then the Slater mills also became known for paying their workers extremely low wages and poor working conditions. The next set of mills were the Lowell mills. These mills were introduced by a man named Francis Cabot Lowell in Massachusetts in 1813. This is probably the most well-known mill system. The Lowell mills also spun the raw cotton into thread, and then they took it a step further, and within the same factory system, they are weaving the thread into cloth on power looms. So whereas the Slater mills were taking raw cotton and producing thread, the Lowell mills were taking raw cotton and producing cloth. The Lowell mills were known for employing young women as workers. They lived in boarding houses that the Lowell mills operated, so the wages that these women were being paid, they then had to pay their employer rent and food. The wages were okay in the early years, but as profits dropped, they started to pay their workers less and less and had to charge them more for rent. So this was an opportunity for people to be employed, but that didn't necessarily mean that they were working in the best conditions or that they were making the best money. Give you guys a second to finish up this slide.